All right, beautiful people. Welcome to the Stoa. Today's session is Rebuilding Society on Meaning, and our good friends Ellie Hain and Joe Edelman have returned to the Stoa, and they're launching this new movement, this beautiful movement, to help society get to a place where everyone gets to support their life by doing what is most meaningful. And we released two videos on the Stoa's YouTube channel last week. One of them was called Exit the Void, which was this excellent video essay that Ellie did about exiting the world of gloom and doom, bullshit and boredom, and entering a future where meaning, beauty, and vitality flourish. And then this was followed up by a video, an excellent video that Joe did on aligning social systems, how we can align markets, recommender systems, products, and organizations with our values. We thought we'd have a Q&A at the Stoa. So anyone can just ask some questions, either put it in the chat or raise your hand, and then we're here for an hour or so, and Joe and Ellie can answer your questions. So that being said, welcome back to Stoa, Joe and Ellie, and any opening thoughts or shares you'd like to do before we go into the Q&A.
Yeah. Thank you for inviting us, and hi everyone. Also, thank you for offering to host these videos on the Stoa. It's done wonders for our work. And yeah, I guess to kind of everyone, I feel like the reception has been quite good, and we've got some really sweet comments. I bet several of them were coming through the Stoa. So yeah, just acknowledging that and thanking everyone for that.
Yeah, and I guess we'll just sort of jump into questions, even though I guess there's probably some people here who haven't watched the talks, but hopefully us answering questions will be just super motivating.
Yeah.
Because it seems like it would be a waste of time for the people who did watch to try to do a kind of a summary or a recap. But I guess maybe I'll give a one-sentence thing, which is just we have a project that's about rebuilding society on meaning.
Yeah. And also, comments are welcome. So if it's not just one question, but something that resonated with you, or kind of something that you disagree with, feel free to bring it up.
Especially if you think we're wrong, because we're really devoting our lives to this. You could save us years of misdirected effort if you can just point out now a good reason for us to stop. So I guess maybe jump in the chat or raise your hand with the either physically or with a little thing.
Yeah.
And we'll start. Thank you, Peter. Oh, Peter's got a question.
Yeah, I can warm up the Stoa of the question for both of you actually. And Ellie, the void, and I know you were talking about the void concept for a while, for a couple of years now. And it came came through really well in this video essay. And it's kind of to summarize the nihilism, kind of existential dread, or some people call black pilled. And it's almost like a Rorschach test when people look at it, and depending on what reality or political compass they belong to, kind of appears different for each person. And I'm curious, how did you come up with that term, and why is it is it a needed rite of passage for people to go through, or can you sidestep it? And how do you kind of alchemize this void staring towards this more value-based meaning approach?
Yeah. Thank you for the question. It's a good one. So how did I come up with this? Good question. I feel like I had some intuition. At the beginning, I was doing this with Tarn, you remember, that was 2 years ago. And I just, it just kind of I was using this term a lot. And then partly also it referenced this movie, Enter the Void. But at the beginning, as kind of maybe you remember, I didn't really have anything to ground it. I just had the right intuition. And I think maybe this is testament that if you stay with the right intuition, even if at the beginning it just doesn't quite hit right, but if you pursue it, at some point it does land somewhere meaningful. So that's kind of the story for it. And then to the second part of the question of whether this is a necessary rite of passage, yeah, totally. And I think it's no coincidence that big thinkers, now obviously like Nietzsche, but many others in like different terms, they like emphasize this, the act of like staring at the void, or kind of sometimes it's also like, the tragedy and the post-tragic, because that's what gives people like depth. Sometimes I say kind of like the further you go, kind of like also like the happier you can go up. So yeah, I think that was it. I remember at the time, kind of like when I was talking with my friends, my single friends, and they had like met someone, and I was like, okay, but have they stared at the void as kind of like this litmus test of whether the person had like the right depth to engage with them. So yeah, totally. And I think something that's like really good about these times, like the meta crisis, is that it is this like civilizational catalyzer for people to do that. So in this sense, it's not so much of a curse, but like can also be a blessing, and this like massive opportunity for collective growth.
Mm. And my follow-up question is for Joe, is and related to what Ellie was just sharing. So first, I want to share, like, I remember Richard Bartlett, he fondly said that Joe is going to value pill all of us. And values was something that I always like got frustrated by, because therapy, self-help, business literature, they throw this word around, and you read it and you're like, okay, like how am I supposed to like use this? But Joe has some of the like best models and understanding of values, in my opinion, and like axiology. And so I'm curious, maybe having a one-on-one is too much of an ask right here, but the curiosity is, if people are not familiar with your work on values, like, could you give a high-level summary? And the follow-up question was, how does that relate to the void? How does like the void relate to maybe being value blind or not being sensitive to one's values?
Cool. Yeah, I'll answer them in the opposite order. So I think there's a sense in which I use sources of meaning and values to mean the same thing. And there's a sense in which the meaning has been leaking out of the world. Things are going gray and dark. And this is kind of what Ellie talks about as the void.
Not just the dark part, it's also the light part.
Yeah, okay.
But
anyway, the meaning is leaking out. And I don't think a lot of, there's a temptation for people to say, oh, meaning is this one thing and it's whatever I'm all about. Meaning is systems thinking. Meaning is God, is Christ. Meaning is nature or whatever, right? There's a tendency for people to be like, oh, well, meaning is just this one thing. It's like what I care about. And all those people that I care about nature, the people who care about Christ, they're wrong about meaning. They're just imagining it. I know where the real meaning is, but I don't do that. I look for meaning in much more granular terms. So if somebody comes to me, they say, oh, meaning is in Christ, or meaning is in nature, or meaning is in systems thinking. I say, oh, well, tell me some meaningful stories about Christ or nature or systems thinking or whatever, And I listen to their stories and I'm like, oh, actually, what you mean when you say meaning is Christ is meaning is like something that you're aware of when you really feel like God is speaking through you, and you're not blocking some kind of like intuition or like, I don't know, whatever. And I get this more specific kind of definition. And then I find that people can relate to that who don't have any Christ idea or whatever, right? So if you go the level below these top level things, which are sometimes called hypergoods, like Christ and nature or whatever, and you look for these more granular sources of meaning or values, which the thing that I think that they are is they're a type of attentional policy. They're a thing that we can attend to in our lives. So you can attend to the slow transformation of some bread that you're making from a floury mass into a whatever. And that might be meaningful. And if it is meaningful to you, like being part of this like kitchen alchemy kind of thing, then it would count as a source of meaning or value in my term. And this, you might be the kind of person who thinks of that in terms of systems thinking, or the kind of person who thinks of that in terms of Christ, or the kind of person who thinks in terms of that of nature. But that particle would be a source of meaning. And okay, going all the way back to the start, sorry, this has become long. The reason the meaning's been leaking out of the world is because we're optimizing in every parts of our lives and systems for things that aren't that, right? Like the online cooking channel is not really worried about whether you're experiencing that slow alchemy in the kitchen, right? Nobody's measuring that. Nobody's designing anything to help people experience that slow alchemy because we don't even know how to talk about it so much. And so that's how these values connect to the void.
Yeah, that's so cool. I love the attentional policy framing. And I think you said elsewhere something like values are the units of meaning. That was the exact phrase. I thought that was excellent. Cool. So how would you like to do the Q&A? Would you like to administrate it, or want me to call on people or...
If you want to call
maybe you can call on people. You're probably
yeah.
better at it than us. Else you get tired.
I can do it. Shirley, Ron, you had a question to share if you'd like to jump in.
Cool, thank you. Hey guys, really enjoyed the video, only partway through. Joe, your longer version. I just have a really basic question, which is how you see your audience or audiences, especially initially, or if you see it in phases. And because I know there'll be the kind of preaching to the choir people, there'll be the really, when something goes viral, all the pushback that comes. I'm bringing to mind, there was the Game B video that premiered at the Stoa some time ago. And I think they even framed it as we're trying to reach out beyond the liminal web, beyond people who would already be pulled in by these ideas. And then because you alluded to it, Joe, I'm wondering how you see in the spiritual and religious traditions taking this, because I would think their reaction to anything that uses the word meaning would be like, hey, we may have something to say about meaning that's been going on for 5,000 years. And so just curious about how you see audience.
Maybe I'll go first, but then Ellie will have more to say than me about the audiences. So I'll just talk about the audience for my talk, and she'll talk about her talk and then the movement. For my talk, there's actually quite a lot of useful stuff in my talk. It's like the subtitle is like practical techniques for aligning organizations and markets and recommenders and so on and so forth. So I care a lot about nerdy audiences, people who want to measure well-being in populations, or like people who want to run surveys to figure out whether people are living by their values, people that make social network kind of social apps, things like that. People, especially the more idealistic ones, who might want to like try to make it in a new way. People that are kind of community entrepreneurs, like Peter, who might want to make a community where something meaningful and precious is cultivated. So there's a whole bunch of specific types of people that I care about with my talk. My talk is much more about being of use to people who want to make meaningful things at different scales, and people who care about this loss in meaning and like want to measure it and things like that, practical kinds of things. And Ellie's talk and the movement have a broader audience, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, so for my talk and kind of like the movement in general, so first of all, like we do have these like phases thing that you mentioned. I have like this Excel with kind of like all subcultures and, like when does it leap to kind of like this like middle mainstream, then kind of like proper mainstream. But so far, and maybe because you were mentioning like the Game B video and this like preaching to the choir thing, I actually don't think this hasn't been like our issue so far. So right now in the STOA are these two videos. These are like the final versions of some talks that we actually gave in person this summer, like several times in Berlin and in the US. And actually the people that came to our talks, it was like a quite diverse audience. I would say that maybe like a quarter or a third would have been familiar with like the Game B, like meta-modern sphere, like the others were not. We've also been kind of like working closely with people from like the rationalist and EA communities that are like disillusioned and are looking for something different, people from like crypto cultural creatives. Then we have people kind of, this like new spirituality. Here it's kind of, John Vervaeke, that's kind of like the Game B version. And, like the religion that's not a religion, but then there's this kind of like Buddhism, like Bay Area version yeah, kind of like no spirituality, no tantra sort of thing, that they have also been into it. We have like social justice people who definitely who are like not online. And then even kind of like conservative, you know, like Theo, adjacent, like post-liberal. These are also kind of like some in these like intellectual avant-garde communities. And then kind of like moving forward, we, you know, there's some people at OpenAI that are like applying some of these. We want to kind of like get more into big tech. So yeah, it's a pretty broad cultural project, and we're kind of thinking of it as like pluralistic from the start, because what we're aiming to provide is not so much a framework that eliminates their own, but rather that helps them talk about the things that they care about through a different lens and with kind of a different language. And so far, all of these communities have found it quite useful. So yeah.
Any follow-up, Sharon?
No, that was really helpful and illuminating. Again, I think when I hear the word movement, sometimes it gets my attention because it can sound like it's wanting to deny other, you know, perspectives or in a way, but so it's good to hear that there are many coming from different places that are finding use in this.
We've been struggling with the word movement too. Sometimes we use like social, like everyone has their own image of like what a movement is. I don't think it's the best word. Sometimes I use social vision. Sometimes I use like professional maker community for like the space maker community. If you think of a, you know, better word, please do DM us.
Thanks again.
Serena Carr, you had a question or share?
Yeah, Peter, thanks for hosting, and Ellie and Joe, thank you for being here and talking about this. My question was for Joe, and it's about, I think towards the end of your video, you had mentioned, you gave an example of a science retreat as a space for someone who might value deep work. And you were talking about how, as part of the process of kind of like creating that space or organizing that space, it gets really difficult to make sure that the goals and funnels aren't crowding the space. And you listed some example of hard steps to plan ahead of time to kind of, I guess, facilitate that process. And I found that really difficult. And I'm just curious if you have any more thoughts about that, maybe even from personal experience, how you worked through those.
Sure, that's really cool that you tried. I mean, the video is a summary. So I wrote a textbook before the video, and I've been teaching this in a course. And actually, it's actually sort of two courses, each of which is 5 weeks that go kind of back to back. And we only get to hard steps in the second course. And it takes 3 weeks for people to kind of like get good at making that grid that I show in the video. So it's not surprising that on your first try, it was challenging. There are a bunch of tips, and I can send you if you want. Maybe I recommend joining. We have a Discord, which I'll put in the chat in a second. And the Discord has, you could either take the course, or you could ask some of the students in the Discord to help you. And I can also send you some links from the textbook that are about methods for generating these hard steps. Yeah, it's a little, I think you can do it with self-study too, but you might have to like devote some hours to practicing.
Awesome, that's super helpful, thank you. And yes, if you could send those links, yeah, and the Discord link, I'm really curious, so thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you, Serena. Matthew, you had a question.
Yes, thank you. My question's for Joe. What I typed in the chat was, how much does the project of rebuilding society on meaning depend on large language models in order to scale? I really loved your video. If you don't mind me just elaborating a bit on what the question is getting to. You've got the small scale of the fringe groups. That's where I've spent my whole life with a lot of meaning. But then you've got the large scale of, you know, you showed these value cards. How do we get 7 billion people who are currently piles of strangers to fill out values cards? Well, they're probably not going to. And what I think, correct me if I'm wrong, what I think I got from your video is part of the plan is that if large language models can be trained on an individual, all the stuff they've put on TikTok, all the stuff they blogged or tweeted or whatever, and try to separate out. Is it that they're separating out, the large language model can separate out what is a hyperobject like? I like Will Smith, I like pizza, I like the NBA, and what is the value? does this depend on something like ChatGPT being able to make that distinction reliably between those two classes of things? And if it doesn't, what do we do? How can that scale even?
It does. It does. It does. We have this working.
It's already working now.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's good news.
Holy shit.
Yeah. It's really cool. We have a chatbot. It's not really ready to share yet, but it doesn't parse all of your social media data. That's not how it starts. It asks you questions about what's meaningful to you. It says, like, tell me a story about what's your most meaningful experiences with your wife, or your most meaningful experiences with your best buddy, or your at work, or whatever. So it asks you questions like that, and then generates these values cards, and you can kind of pin them to your profile. So that works. It's great at it, actually. It's better than I've trained people to do this for the last 3 years or whatever, but the chatbot is better than the people, mostly.
Wow.
There's maybe 2 people in the world that are maybe better than the chatbot.
For the moment.
For the moment, yeah, but we're going to
Because we're
improve.
training the chatbot.
We're going to improve. They're now training the chatbot to be even better. Yeah.
You know what my obvious follow-up is, right? Can I please use it? Like, oh my God, can I get in line? Is there a sign-up sheet?
I'm sure. So sign up at rebuildingmeaning.org, and probably in 2 months we'll have a version you can use.
And also some sort of like website where you can see actually this like universe of meaning and how it connects to these archetypes that you were talking about. That's all part of this like first half of the year plan that will help us with like legibility and so on. So yeah, stay tuned.
So then do these get turned into what is equivalently a type of hashtag? It's like hashtags could be hyperobjects or values, but then just singling out, no, we're only going to have like people hashtag stuff in some future recommender system. The vision is that then would be more important. It's going to focus on those hashtags.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That's so exciting. Well, thank you. That was my question. I'm just happy to talk to you, and thank you for all you're doing.
Oh yeah, sure. Great to meet you.
Super cool. Thank you, Matthew. Grace, you had a question.
Yeah, Joe, good to see you again. And as you know, a big fan of your work and everything you're working on. And we are sort of working on different projects in that same realm. And what I've been curious about the role of community, and I was quite struck by Ellie's answer that you do have to do this work individually in order to even sort of step into this. And at Priceless, we've been working on community and circles and women's circles and how our behavior and our values as a circle are evolved. And this idea of the individual as the primary holon that we relate to is very new in human history, like super new. The idea that I have my individual values as separate from my religion, tribe, etc. And so I'm wondering, like how much of your work is really relevant to individuals, or how do you see that evolving into community? Because my sense is we're not going to be like either individuals or everybody. Like it's going to be right. Like there are these subgroups, and how do your values change when you get in a community? You're like, oh well, I better no, because that's the way everything. Like that's kind of my question. Like how does your work interface with communities and become more or less relevant in different groups?
Sure. Maybe I'll start and then so the last thing you said, we don't call a value, we call it a norm. So when you feel a kind of social pressure towards a certain kind of thing, like if I was like, Grace, you better denounce your privilege right now, you're not welcome in this chat. That's not a value you have. That's a social pressure I'm putting on you, right? So we call that a norm. But people's values do change in groups, mostly because they get inspired. They have role models. They see people who have intentional policies that are different than theirs, that are inspiring. For instance, I find the way that Peter facilitates super inspiring. So when I'm in situations where I'm near Peter, I'm more likely to kind of like, his values are kind of coming into me. But it's a very voluntary thing. It's not because Peter's like projecting a norm that I should facilitate the same way. It's more like, oh, wow, that's cool. And about individuals and groups. So I think it has to do with, it's kind of trippy. For various reasons, I think that even when you talk about individual values, it's actually a social object in a way that when you talk about individual preferences, it's not a social object. I don't know if that makes some intuitive. Does that make some intuitive sense to you?
Yeah, to me it makes it, I mean, I'm arbitrarily choosing the community as the primary whole on that I work with. So yes, that does make sense. Like that it's almost difficult to distinguish like where that value, like what's the edge of that value? Is it like mine or held together? Is it, yeah. And like
Yeah.
when I'm near Peter, then my value already, it's like there's like some of the air we're breathing is the same air. Yeah, I think that's really interesting to think about it. Like, oh, it's, yeah. How does that?
That's great, because that makes values a kind of a link where you can, if you're dealing with a system that profiles people as individuals and you collect their values, you end up, it's kind of like a cool hack that actually makes it not an individualistic system. That's what I've actually seen empirically. That's not the only way to do it.
Can you explain that better? Like, what does that mean? Like, when you investigate it as individual, it turns out not to be individual. Can you?
Let's say I so one of my values is deep work. I talk about this a lot in the talk, and or I sometimes call it being turtley, like pursuing a question for a long time. And this is it's inherently social. Like I like to be curious about things with Ellie, for instance. Like we've been curious about some of the same things for years, and I have other friends that I've been curious about the same things for years, right? So like you said, it's very hard to draw the boundaries of this. This is sort of like, so, one way to think about it is that values and practices or values and spaces are like a dual. So every time you name a value, you're actually also naming a kind of a community. And so when you collect the values from a population, you're also collecting not necessarily the communities they have, but the communities they need, like the communities that are meaningful to them. I don't know if that it's, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you know, if I wanted to really throw a wrench in it, we were talking this morning in the women's group, we were talking about cycles, and like my values change at different times of the month. I mean, mine personally not anymore, but for a lot of women, that's like, oh, different times of the month. And then for me, like going through that change, my values changed with my body's change too. So that, like, it's very fluid. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. And maybe I'm not sure. I think you said something, or at least I understood that we were saying that this like laid on the individual. I don't think that's at all like the theory of change that we have or what we're proposing. Maybe what I said like at the individual level is that like people, like individuals, do need to have like the experience of meaning themselves, and kind of like they do need to realize that there's something in their life that is meaningful and worth it, and kind of like maybe make it a commitment to like live according to that. That doesn't mean that my favorite way for people to like discover that or live through that is individually, because like that's absolutely not the case, right? And I think it's worth differentiating. Maybe there's like the part of like discovering what's meaningful. This can be like introspection. You can do this through our chat. You can do this like in a women's circle, men's circle, in a religious setting. Personally, like how we're like thinking about that is, even though we do have the chat that like favors like individual exploration, the way that we want to release a chat is through like events where people come together in community and like use it, and they interview each other and they use the chat together, and like that would kind of like, you know, stay as a community. And the reason that they could kind of like do this introspective process over and over, but the reason why these, like what we're excited about these, is because like maybe if the introspective part isn't that important, the practice part of like living by your values and like sharing it with others, like you can't do this on your own. I mean, maybe some of them, of course, we all have, you know, values that, you know, maybe like self-care, we do like our evenings on our own. Yes, go for it. But like the really good ones, they usually happen for people, and there's a reason for that. And we want to honor that and kind of integrate these at every stage of our theory and vision. So.
Fabulous. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Grace. Brendan, you had a question.
Yes, thank you. All right. So I've been thinking recently about a lot of logistical issues. I mean, like you have a supply chain and, you know, a capability stack. So, you know, I remember you guys talking about how you wanted to branch out into designing and implementing new voting systems. other consensus building processes. So while centering around meaning, as these often aren't, we have democracy, but for a lot of people, it doesn't mean anything, right? So what is your on the ground action plan for implementing these processes?
That's a big question.
I'm a leader on this, so I can answer it. It's the 3-step plan where voting systems and things like that is kind of the 3rd step. Although I am having a call. You guys know Polis? Do you know Polis, Brandon? Polis is an interesting kind of voting system, popular in the Web3 radical exchange kind of community. I'm having a call with that guy to talk about some of this stuff soon. But actually, the voting system stuff is a few steps down the road. So first, we're trying to make recommenders that recommend things according to that are meaningful. The next step after that is market replacements that do allocations according to meaning. So take resources from a group of people and help them all live in a more meaningful way. And then the 3rd step is voting systems, because I think those are all similar problems and hard in they're each one is a level up. I think it's harder to make a voting system than it is to make a market replacement, and it's harder to make a market replacement than it is to make a recommender algorithm. So that's kind of the order of operations. We have a team in our Discord that's working on that, that's interested, working firstly on the recommender side. There's some people at OpenAI that are working with us that are focused on that. And there's some pages in our Notion that describe the research plan. So I can send you some of that if you want. And if you know some people that are mechanism designers or would want to work on the recommender stuff or the market stuff, you can put them in touch.
Any follow-up share a question, Brandon?
Well, I don't know. There was something interesting that I was talking with you guys about a few months ago, where I was trying to figure out how can we implement anything close to the Hansi Freinacht 6 new forms of politics, and I was like, that sort of thing is like you got a lane, you're either in the meaning making game or you're in the democracy game. And then I was like realizing, well, actually you can primarily anchor into one of those 6 and then branch out from there. And then there maybe would be other organizations that would anchor into something else and then branch out, and that would still be a way of implementing that. And I'm not sure if you guys you didn't seem all that concerned whether you were conforming to any larger framework, but that's like the game plan that I think it was kind of cool. So yeah.
Yeah, I should say also, I don't really have any thoughts about how to drive adoption of these new systems. My first goal is just to invent them, make sure they work.
Even though we are partnering with Andrew Frawley, Good Lives movement, that he's trying to build the political base in proper American politics. So he used to do marketing for Andrew Yang, and now he's really into mental health. So we're having a platform in that thing.
Yeah, maybe there's kind of a invention research project, and then there's a building a political movement kind of thing, and then hopefully someday they meet.
Yeah.
So thanks, Brandon. Ronan, you had a question.
Hi, yeah, thanks. This is my first time in these spaces, so really interesting to be around. I just saw this on Twitter actually a few days ago and watched the videos, which was also really cool. Yeah, I'm an AI researcher, and I'm interested in social network design and recommender systems. And I was wondering how much you guys think these ideas can be integrated into existing social network platforms with issues of data siloing and algorithms behind opaque sort of black boxes, or do you think that you need more some kind of new social network infrastructure to implement these ideas?
Yeah, I give 2 different social network recommendations in chapter 4, and one of those I think has been and will be adopted in existing platforms, and the other one not. So Facebook already does some surveys. The values cards are a later version of a survey methodology that I taught to a bunch of people at Facebook, and they try to measure what's meaningful to their users on newsfeed and in groups and in events. and they use this as one of many signals into newsfeed algorithm. So that's one of my recommendations, not as one of many signals, because they're also like balancing with like ad revenue and things like that. I would prefer to have a system that just does what's meaningful, not half of what's meaningful and half of what shows us lots of ads. Yeah, so that one, the one about trying to measure what's meaningful to your users and give them what's meaningful, I think we'll see a lot of uptake. And part of what we want to do is drive that uptake. We want Facebook to move, you know, they have like all these things are knobs, right? That they can adjust in their ML objective function. So that we want them to turn up the meaning and turn down the ads or whatever. So that, but it's going to be easy for them to adopt this kind of like survey methodology. The other thing, the space trains that I cover in chapter 4, this is really going to take new, I think it's going to take new structures, new social media experiments. I've already heard from 4 different people. My talk's been out a week, 4 different startups, including one like a multiple YC founder person, like, oh man, space trains, I'm going to try to make the space train social network or whatever. So we'll see if any of them succeed. Probably not one of the 4 that have already written me, but I definitely believe it can happen. And then there's going to be a question, because I think space trains will probably not be in a good position to take on the largest social networks, because they'll lose in the engagement wars, even at the same time as they're much better for people. And so then there's this kind of like second stage of like how to move people into them despite the war for attention.
Yeah, and I think kind of like to this later point, an analogy that we sometimes like to use is this sort of like new tech that is like space-based and like, you know, really good for meaning and community. It's the equivalent of like good cuisine or kind of like Whole Foods type of thing. So like right now, if you say like Facebook and like Tinder, they're like McDonald's and Kentucky Fried Chicken and so on. And like obviously at the beginning, these were all the hype, but like culturally, as things evolve, no one who's like really self-respecting like really consumes that. Not to shame anyone that does, you know, we all have our moments. But and then kind of like shifting, you know, like the status and how, you know, like how do people move towards them, and creating this like ecosystem with kind of like the right prices and the right recognition and like the right metrics for like something that's like entirely different, and we all know.
I feel like I should mention she's European. We live in Europe.
Yeah.
In America, they still eat a lot of fast food.
But it is changing.
And it's a classist thing in America, but in Europe, it's not really a classist thing. It's yeah, it's more of a general kind of thing.
Yeah, but yeah. And I guess kind of another thing is that it like plays in favor of us, that like right now everyone's extremely dissatisfied with how these things work. And I know this is kind of like idealistic. People want to change it because it sucks, but like, yeah, actually, it, you know, it does, and it's kind of happening.
Any share a follow-up?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, interesting. I also kind of think that something what you said about, I think getting people to sort of incentivizing to share data with algorithms that are more aligned with them, that like once you start sharing data with an algorithm and you start getting interesting recommendations, it's kind of and like meaningful, right? Like not just, you know, engagement recommendations, but things that are more meaningful to you, then that can also sort of draw a lot of attention. I think, and people would be like, oh, try this new cool thing. It's like it's actually like sharing data with it is actually really beneficial.
Yeah, totally. I think that I believe that there will be a really big uptick just based on recommender quality. Like this will drive a lot at first, because people will be like, holy shit, like the first time people kind of experience that. The difficulty is that there's going to be a pressure to water it down. Like in general, platforms often do this, where like Amazon, for instance, started out trying to give really good recommendations. Then you get sponsored recommendations. Then you get what, right? Like, so we have to, this is one reason why we have to try to make sure that there's a whole bunch of things have to line up, like a business model and, you know, the actual structure of the recommender and like the user base and like the two-sided markets. There's like, it's a huge business strategy challenge to pull this off in a way that lasts.
Right. Healthy food is more expensive. It can be a lot more expensive.
Yeah.
It doesn't
Thanks.
have to be, but we're not there yet.
Right.
So
that if anyone has any questions, feel free to pop in the chat or raise your hand. That was it for the questions for now. Question that came up for me. I'm curious how you two are applying this to your organization, movement, even your like relationship, friendship. Like how are you applying this stuff there?
the meaning thing,
Aligning with values.
aligning with values, living by our values. It's part of my journaling practice whenever, and kind of like it's also been like part of our friends' vocabulary for a while. So whenever there's something that like feels kind of off, and it's like, okay, what is it? I think actually that's a place where even if you have like the chatbot that helps you do that, there's value in like going through the process by yourself. So yeah, whenever there's like a feeling that's like bugging me or something that was like really important, I was like, I want to get more of that. I like go through a process and have like my list of values that I like update. Sometimes even when I want to be more intentional, when I'm going to visit my family and I'm not with them that often, then I will do that beforehand to like see what are the things that I want to kind of like really cherish when I'm with them. Yeah.
I met Ellie because she took the course and it was really nice, like when we were getting to be friends, because we would just sit together and do emotions to values as like the very first, like when we met for coffee or whatever, like, I'd be like, I'm feeling nervous, blah, 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 because this thing is important to me and it might be at risk. And she'd be like, I'm feeling excited because this thing, whatever, you know what I mean? Like we do emotions to values. And it was a wonderful way to get to know her. Because for two reasons. One is it surfaces like it's like really authentic, right? Like you can really show up with whatever is going on for you that day. And two, you get really detailed information about what's important to someone. And so you learn a lot about them very quickly.
Yeah. I guess the other thing that happened today, I had this lunch date with a friend who's actually a teacher at the school, and I was like talking about, like a relationship pattern with my boyfriend, and I was like explaining like how we get into this like like very deep conversations about metaphysics, and I was like not even talking about the values, but like she just picked up off the values and like told them to be straight away. But like the way that she did it, I was able to kind of like pick that they were values, but if not, they would just have like melded into the conversation naturally. And I think that's also kind of like part of it. We use this vocabulary, but without kind of like, oh, now we're doing the values articulacy thing, It's just kind of like part of how we talk about the world and like interacting with people and our just experience of life.
Yeah, very cool. And surprising to see that, because I find when I'm not aligned, like misaligned with the most important people in my life, like usually associated with like vibing, then other things like unpleasantries ripple out from there. But when I get those dialed in, and feels like I can manifest and create in a more wholesome way.
Yeah.
So we got some other questions. Let's go with Elliot. Elliot, you had a question.
Thanks, Peter. Hey, Joe. Hey, Ellie. I didn't get to see the video, but big picture, if this is maximally successful, what does the world look like in, say, 10 years?
We have this as a slide in our deck, but yeah, I think my talk maybe gives a bit more of the feeling, but if you want something a bit more concrete, there's two things. Like first, how it looks from the outside. So kind of like external metrics that we could really, like an external observer would be able to see clearly. And that is a pretty significant increase in creativity and innovation. So this is like, research labs being, much more creative, much more like IP being registered, scientific breakthroughs, but also like in the arts and so on, which we hope would lead to some sort of adoption in the rest of the world. So in the same way that like California really is leading with entertainment and tech, and the other people are trying to, copy their Silicon Valley sort of thing. So something like that, then really increasing like the social fabric, community, bonds, stronger relationships, even like individual relationships and like friendship relationships, precisely because of people being able to be articulate about the things that like really matter to us, which obviously in the face of, you know, the stressors that are coming and that are going to come, whether it's an economic crisis or like climate change, is going to be like really helpful, and will probably add up to this, you know, like ripple effect of people copying this way of living. But then something that is like less tangible, but I think equally important, is how people feel in general. So kind of like right now, people are like happy, but even kind of like people that are kind of happy, there's not this kind of like love for life, like, yes, it's amazing, you know, I'm really living like my dream life. And just generally kind of like both my work and relationships and like environments, like city, neighborhood, like is optimized for like that thriving. So it would be more of that, you know, general sense of meaning and love for all the areas of your life.
I'll add a couple other things, other predictions, presuming we succeed. The structure of cities will change with much more of a focus on neighborhoods and kind of like local connections, much more public space, less residential. Residential will be rearranged to afford more community structure. And our relationship with our technology will change dramatically because we'll trust it. It'll be worth our trust. We'll feel that it understands what we want on a very deep level. And it will do things like arrange dates for us, or like, you know, say, like you've got really
great dates.
You got to meet this person who's going to be a great collaborator, or, you know, just like whatever, or even just like, so we'll be able to trust it because it will have, it will know the difference between like what addicts us, engages us, and what we really want our life to be full of.
We talked the other day about this high sci-fi vision for our thing that is kind of like an AI that creates out of your life like the most loving, most fun, most personalized scavenger hunt, which just gives you like all these challenges about the things that, you know, like you really care about this particular moment, and lets you grow into them rather than just like doing them for you.
Very cool. Thank you.
Thanks, Elliot. Serena, you had another question? Pop off mute.
Yeah. So my next question, just briefly, what do you both think, what kind of spaces do you think we need most right now? Whether it's space for knowledge, space for togetherness, space for creativity, etc. Or what are your favorite spaces?
Yeah, I find this hard to answer in the collective sense, but it's pretty easy to answer as an individual. I've heard the way that I would try to answer it in a collective sense would be to make like a giant spreadsheet of like what all these different, and I also feel like I need a lot of empathy into people who need very different kinds of spaces than me. Like I see this in my school, you know, I had like some single mothers go through the school, and they really needed different things than I do. And so it's like very hard for me to like say what we need without doing a fucking lot of surveys. But what I need, I think I need more spaces for nature appreciation, like collective walks in forests, like things like that. Like this is something that I'm a little starved for.
I live in Berlin.
I live in a city. Yeah, it's like a pretty urban landscape. And so that's something that would be like really good for me. And something else that would be good for me, I really would love to have a research lab that's like kind of custom for these kinds of pursuits that we've been describing here, where I get to work together in person with a lot of other people that care about these recommender systems and these market replacements and things like that. I could describe that. Maybe Ellie can do the same.
I think for me, is good public spaces for people to like naturally come together and like bump into each other, even with like families and so on. Like public squares and like public parks, but that they're kind of like, you know, really well made and like heavily transited. Berlin is like pretty good for that. I'm originally from Barcelona, and I was like blown away when I was like visiting during Christmas, because even kind of like, you know, mid of December, it's like not super cold, but it's also like not super warm. And like you'll see like any square, and there's like children like playing football, like so many, and like all the parents are just like, you know, drinking beer just like by the side. I know this is like a huge problem in the US and kind of like, you know, just like structurally very hard to replicate, but something like that would be a massive boon. Yeah. And also something that's connected but different, good spaces for like shared parenting.
Serena, I wonder how you would
Social
answer
space.
your own question.
Yeah, well, thank you both for sharing. Agreed about the collective nature space. I live in Philly, and it also is very difficult to find or enjoy with other people. So public parks would be a big one, but I think maybe more space for intellect would be great. Yeah, I think that'd be like one of the main ones for me right now. I am finding like success with that online, but it doesn't really feel the same. And I'm not finding a lot of people in person that maybe have a shared interest in talking about ideas, or maybe ideas that I care about. So that would be one for me. Yeah. Thank you for asking.
Sure.
Yeah, you're always welcome to come to our online and future offline events.
Thank you. Thanks.
We hope to be able to hook you up with the right people.
I'm going to have an intellectual dinner party in a couple weeks. You can fly to Berlin for it.
Thank you. Appreciate the invite.
One thing, so I originally wanted the Stoa to be a coffee shop before the pandemic, which I still might do. I think it's maybe in a couple of years, but something that fuses like this nebulous space and the wisdom gym with a coffee shop setting, like what you just towards Joe. That would be, I would totally vibe with that. So we have 5 minutes left. Do you have can you stay at the maybe 10-15 minutes after? Fill a couple more questions.
Yep.
Ronan, you had another question.
Yeah, just about the role of algorithms. Some of the topics that came up made me think of this. Like Daniel Schmachtenberger talks about how algorithms can potentially sort of disintermediate us from reality. You know, for example, you could imagine now they have this court where I think there's some company that's trying to have a chat GPT essentially represent like the lawyer. Like he's the lawyer. Like it will do the talking, and just the human will just like say what chat GPT wrote, you know, for him to say. And you can kind of see where these things can get kind of dystopic. Because, you know, these language models kind of, they're our sort of interface into reality, and we trust them, and they have to be very reliable or whatever. And then, yeah, and then there's better alternatives, I guess, where they're more connecting us more deeply, and we're not losing our touch on reality. We're not like relying on them too heavily. So yeah, I just wonder how you guys think about that tension.
I think it's really about, I think that there's a whole bunch of social factors that make it a bad idea to trust the algorithm now. It has the wrong information. It's owned by an entity that we shouldn't really trust. It's the social position of the algorithm is one that cuts us off, right? Because we're like, it's recommending things to us as individuals on our private screen and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of factors, but I think that one of the things that's wonderful about code is that it can evolve quickly. It's like there's like 3 ways of coding up social things. One is norms, one is law, and one is code. And each one has, as it's introduced, resulted in an Cambrian explosion of social possibility, right? So the variety of corporate forms and nonprofits and stuff like this, and insurance structures and so on, this all exploded as law became, you know, codified and varied and so on and so forth. And I think that was a good thing. It's like really good to have legal systems in addition to norms. And then I think it's also really good to have code in addition to legal systems and norms as a way of structuring our social worlds. The problem is that there's been some dystopic kind of pressures on what the code does, but I don't think that's inherent to it being code. I think it's just because of the scenario. So I hope that, you know, if we succeed wildly, then hopefully code will be more responsive to really what's good for us and what matters. Any share or follow up, Ronan?
Yeah, I guess, yeah, one thing I worry about with this code, it's so pervasive and so it's like everywhere in our lives now. I just worry about, Crispin Harris talks about this kind of, degrading of human cognition. And I can really feel it happening with people becoming just really over-reliant. I see people saying on Twitter, like, yeah, GPT does everything for me all week today and things like that. So I just worry it's like going really quickly down that kind of dystopic slope. So yeah, that's kind of where
totally.
this is coming from.
It is. Yeah, I'll just say one more thing, which is that there's a deep difference between the algorithms knowing our preferences or goals and knowing our values, which is that our preferences or goals are things that can be, like, preferences are usually tastes or something that can be delivered to us. So it's just like consumption preference or whatever. A goal is something that can be done for us, right? Oh, I don't have to do it at all. It's a deliverer who does it or whatever, right? A value is something that we have to live ourselves, that the thing can help put us in a position to live, right? So if we want to be creative, well, you can't do that for someone, right? Like that, then they're not actually being creative. They just, right?
Unless they're using artists like AI art, right? Like people will say that's creative too or something. But
yeah, so they can lie. But I think
you
if
can specify this too.
Yeah, if it's a real value, then it's different than a goal, and it's a substantial way that somebody wants to live. I mean, the way that I use word values. So then we wouldn't have this problem. So that does a lot in terms of like automating the right things and not automating the wrong things.
Yeah, it's more like how do you want to do the thing rather than what do you want to do. That's kind of like hence the scavenger hunt metaphor.
I'll read Elliot's question, and this could be the one we close on. How can folks here and beyond best help you move this forward?
Good. Well, so if you resonate with the vision, for the moment, most important thing is like help us share the talks and the vision. These can just be like retweeting on Twitter, but that's usually not what's most valuable. Like our favorite way of doing this is like to send kind of like personalized messages to kind of like people who think would be into that and like why they would be into that. Kind of the next step for that is to like host parties, like watch parties or like discussion groups where we like stream the video, and we could also like come later if you want to do a Q&A. And then maybe like we're trying to kind of like get together a team. We'll probably send an email via rebuildingmeaning.org. But yeah, if you would know the right people for some of the things that we're building, that would be amazing.
Yeah. So, and when you forward our talks, just like send them to an individual and say, hey, I know you care about recommender systems. You make recommender systems. Like you should watch chapter 2 of Joe's talk. Like it gives a new way to make recommender systems that I think you'd be really interested in.
Yeah.
Or I know you're making a social app or something. Or if it's Ellie's talk, like, hey, maybe I know you were a big organizer of effective altruist conferences or whatever, but probably you're done with effective altruism now, like the rest of us. Like what about rebuilding meaning? Like, or whatever, like send a,
something personalized.
Send something personalized. And there's, I think, a lot of personalized things that you can say about each talk that really speak to a particular kind of, I don't want to say demographic, whatever kind of person that you might know. Yeah.
Awesome. So we can gently close here, but I'm curious, Joe, Ellie, if any way you want to use this space. We've got a bunch of people here. Do you want to ask a question? Do you want to get some responses on a particular prompt?
Yeah, I have one. I wonder, we said a lot about our strategy today. Is there something we're missing? Like, what would you do if you were suddenly like in our shoes and you believed in this vision, but you didn't necessarily believe in our like way of going about it? Any suggestions?
And perhaps what we can do is we can take a moment of silence, and then people just put stuff in the chat. We can kind of collect some responses. But if anyone has something to say right now, just raise your hand, and then you can unmute. And I didn't put any thought if this would be awkward if no one put anything in the chat. So apologies.
It's okay.
It's okay.
I guess it means we're doing a good job.
Yeah, if anyone has a moment of insight, something we really can't miss, please like do email or DM us. Because pretty smart people here will definitely use your brains.
Yeah, if you don't have our emails, hello@rebuildingmeaning.org will reach both of us.
Very cool. So we're getting a couple of responses in the chat. So before you two leave, you can kind of save the chat, little dots, and you can kind of read it at your leisure. But I'll close
Cool.
now. Do check out the website. And every time I get so excited every time Joe and Ellie do something, and then when I found out they're doing something together, I'm like, okay, this is going to be awesome. And they delivered. So super excited to see them working together and seeing what's unfolding from this. So do check out their work and the videos on the Stoa YouTube channel if you have not. And yeah, lots of cool stuff happening at the Stoa. Tomorrow we're doing a series that's starting on system sensing. Nancy and Luea from Collective Transitions are coming in to doing system sensing, a practice space to enliven the senses, which is super cool. And we have another session, Turn Your Life into Art, Lessons in Psychomagic from the San Francisco underground scene. That's on Thursday. And Dave Snowden's coming in next week, and he's going to dunk on metamodernism. So that should be a fun one. You can go to thestoa.ca to check those out. That being said, Joe, Ellie, everyone, thank you so much for coming to the Stoa today.
Thank you for having us. Thank you everyone for coming and the questions. All right.